Okay, I'm going to get going. So hello, my talk this evening is about blameless post-mortems. It's now common practice across the industry to hold a post-mortem after there's been a production incident. But I sometimes find myself wondering whether we do this because we're really learning valuable things about our system and our processes, or has it just become a habit? Something we do, well, just because that's what we do. So before I get going, a very quick introduction to me. My name is Sophie Weston. I've worked in tech for about 25 years now, mostly as a software engineer. And for much of that time, I was working kind of with ops teams and writing tools for ops teams. So I am a bit obsessed with DevOps. I currently work at Anaplan, who are based in San Francisco, but they started life in a Yorkshire barn, and they still have an office in York, which is where I'm based. Outside of work, I'm an ambassador for Women in Tech York, and I'm part of the team that organises DevOps Days London. So this is an outline of what we're going to cover in the next kind of 30 minutes or so. First, we'll have a quick recap of what we actually mean by a blameless post-mortem, just so we're all on the same page. Then we'll look again at the reasons for holding post-mortems, explore some best practices and what goes into making a successful post-mortem. And along the way, I'll explain why the blameless bit really does matter. So what is a blameless post-mortem? Well, first, let's be clear, nobody died. A post-mortem is simply the process of trying to understand what happened during a production outage, an incident. And whilst post-mortem is what they're often called, we'll also see them referred to as retrospectives, post-incident review, root cause analysis, and debriefings. But in my experience, post-mortem is the most common term. In simple terms, an incident post-mortem is basically a meeting. It's a discussion where we get everyone together to talk about what happened during an incident, why it happened, how the team responded, what can be done to prevent similar things happening again in the future, how to improve future responses when they do, because they will, because failure is inevitable. And the idea of a blameless post-mortem is to do all of that without any finger pointing or blaming of individuals or teams. Okay, so that's a quick recap of what a blameless post-mortem is, but why should we do them? Why make such a fuss about them being blameless? So this is Google's take on it from their SRE handbook, and it's quite a good definition or summary of what a blameless post-mortem is all about. And there's two important points here. In a blameless post-mortem, it's assumed that every team and individual acted with good intentions, made the right decision and did the right thing based on the information they had available to them at the time. So I'm going to come back and expand on this point in a little while. But to take the second point first, that we need to avoid having a culture of finger pointing and shaming. This is important for a number of reasons. The first is that, very simply, we don't throw anyone under the bus as a convenient way of explaining away what happened. So not even the intern. So this is from an incident that happened a few weeks ago when a test email was sent out to lots of HBO Max customers, and the company promptly blamed the intern. And what's more, they did this very publicly on Twitter. And even though the intern was being helped through this in an apparently supportive and caring way, they were still blamed, and that's not okay. We don't want to make people feel bad. We talk a lot in our industry about the need to foster a culture of psychological safety, and this is a pretty basic step in trying to achieve that goal. We don't want to make people feel bad of being afraid of failing and trying new ways of doing things in the future, of being innovative and looking for ways to improve. And as it says in the Google definition, if people are worried about being blamed and shamed, they'll be less likely to bring issues to light, which of course is the opposite of what we want. We want people to feel safe to speak up, be open and honest about problems they've seen or worries they have, so they can be investigated and addressed before they become the next P1 customer impacting incident. Plus, it's too easy to just blame human error for failures and for incidents. Sadly, we still see this happen far too often. You don't usually have to look very far or very hard to find examples where a production outage is blamed on the actions of an individual or team. There's the case I already mentioned with HBO Max and their poor intern. Another recentish example was a major DNS outage at Salesforce back in May, which resulted in their customers not being able to log into the service for over 5 hours. I think it was so bad that even their own status page couldn't be accessed, apparently. But according to an article in the Register, when they first published their root cause analysis and their chief availability officer gave a briefing on the outage, they blamed a single employee for not having followed procedure when making a configuration change, and also said that action had been taken with regard to that employee. So this is not only wrong, but it's short-sighted. Whatever action someone takes, they can only do so if the system enables that action and allows them to do that thing. So you have to move past blaming people and assume that they were doing what they thought was the best thing at the time, based on the system and based on the information they had. So this is the first point mentioned in the Google definition, which I said I'd come back to, that we assume that everyone involved in an incident had good intentions and did the right thing with the information they had available to them at the time, that they made the right decision. So not making people feel bad is very important, but this is where the blameless part really matters. It's so important, I've actually given it a whole slide all of its own. You have to assume good intent. Because being blameless isn't just about not saying blamey things. It's about not thinking blamey things. I cannot stress how important this bit is. Because if you think that an incident is someone's fault and really you think that they're to blame, even if you don't say anything and you're not blamey and you don't make them feel bad about what happened, but if that's what you're really thinking, you'll stop being curious about what happened and you'll stop asking questions. And you need to be genuinely curious and keep asking lots of questions. Otherwise, you won't maximize the learning and the value that it's possible to get from your incident. So something I see happen quite often in postmortems is that people will look to blame themselves for doing something or not doing something that contributed to an incident, or maybe for not spotting there was a problem quickly enough, or not coming up with a fix fast enough. While it could be argued that people blaming themselves is better than they're being blamed by others, this is still something we should seek to discourage, because it doesn't matter who's doing the blaming. It will still have the same effect of killing off that curiosity, shutting down the conversation, and stopping us from looking for other answers and asking the questions that we need to ask to learn and get value from an incident. So incidents have been described as unplanned investments where all the costs are paid up front. And that upfront payment is in time, in productivity, impact to customers, in goodwill, in revenue. And the return that we get on that investment is the learning that we extract from it. And postmortems are the process that we use to extract that value, that value we've already paid for. If we view them as a boring chore, something that we have to do simply because that's what's expected, because that's what the process is, then we are missing out. Because incidents are one of the best opportunities we have to learn about our systems and better understand how they really work, not how we think they work, because those two things are not necessarily the same. So Dr. Richard Cook, who's actually a medical doctor, has spent over 30 years researching complex systems, and in particular how they fail. He actually wrote a paper that's just called How Complex Systems Fail. The first time I read it, I simply couldn't believe that it hadn't been written specifically about IT systems. It's just so applicable and relevant. And if you haven't read it, you should go and read it. It's not very long, it's incredibly interesting. I've put the link in the references at the end of my slides, which I'm happy to share afterwards. Anyway, Dr. Cook describes this difference between how our systems really work and how we think they work as being the system imagined versus the system as found. Imagined because we never actually see our code running. We don't see our data sat in database tables or see our containers or our Kubernetes clusters. We have visual representations and mental models of these things, but we can never actually see our system functioning. And he describes incidents as being messages from the as found system, from the real system, from kind of beyond the line, as he puts it. And these are messages that are pointers to areas of interest, bits of the system we should go and investigate further. And he also describes incidents as bits of wisdom that we ignore at our peril. So incidents may be great opportunities for learning, but we have to recognize that they're also messy. We like to try and make them tidy and very linear and pinpoint not only the one root cause, but also the precise moment they started and ended with a nice neat timeline in which all the events fit in a nice orderly fashion. But the reality is that incidents are messy. It can be hard to say when a problem first started and at what point does a problem become an incident. And what about all those near misses, those times when we start to see an issue with the system only for it to be resolved by an observant engineer, or the one we all love, for it to just magically resolve itself. So extracting the value from our incidents, getting the return on that investment we already made, to convert that into learning and greater understanding isn't always straightforward. We have to put a bit of effort into making sense of what happened. And to do that, we have to ask lots of questions. So what kind of questions should we ask? So one simple and popular technique is known as the 5 whys, because that's exactly what you do. You keep asking why, supposedly 5 times. The idea of this is that you don't stop at the first obvious answer you get, but you keep going. You keep asking why to dig deeper and keep looking for better answers. Now, there are things to be said for this approach, and it's a good way to get more experience and practice asking more and better questions. But it is also a bit simplistic, and there are arguments that why isn't actually the best question to be asking. Asking why in itself has the potential to be a bit blamey. Why did Alex, the SRE, decide to reboot the server when responding to that alert at 3 a.m.? All the best incidents always happen at 3 a.m. As opposed to, how did Alex make the decision that rebooting the server at 3 a.m. was the best thing to do? That immediately pushes the focus of the question beyond Alex, assumes that they acted with good intent, and hopefully leads to more questions about what the state of the system was at the time and what information Alex had to work on. So substituting how for why is a good start, but there's so much more that we can ask. So John Alsport is a leading figure in the field of resilience engineering. He's the founder of Adaptive Capacity Labs. He used to be CTO at Etsy, and before that he was at Flickr. The following are examples of just some of the questions he suggested that we should be asking after incidents. Things like, what do people do during the response to incidents that they don't make explicit? What tricks or shortcuts do they use that others aren't aware of? Which tools prove to be useful? Which tools prove to be distracting or unhelpful? How do teams perceive which parts of their application or systems are too risky to touch? How did this view arise? How universal is that perspective amongst all teams? Are there any sources of data about the system, logs, graphs, etc., that people regularly dismiss or are suspicious of? So incidents can often be the time when expert knowledge about a system, the kind of knowledge you only get from experience and working closely with a particular system, is used and drawn upon almost without people realizing it. Those times when it looks like someone is kind of working more on instinct than anything else, when they know just which error message to look for in a log file, or they know to ignore a particular metric on a dashboard. And it's when people are working under the pressure that comes with a major incident that expert knowledge surfaces. And a post-mortem is the process by which you can mine that wealth of knowledge and extract learning from it. Also, we shouldn't forget about the people side of things. Our systems are socio-technical systems, after all. Incidents and how we handle them have the potential to reveal a lot about our policies and processes, and even about how our organisation is structured and how it functions. So Nora Jones, she was part of the chaos engineering team at Netflix. She was head of chaos engineering at Slack, and she's now the founder and CEO of Jelly.io, which is a SaaS incident analysis platform. It's currently in beta testing and it looks seriously interesting. She gave a talk at the virtual DevOps Enterprise Summit conference back in May about incident analysis. And she spoke about the kinds of things you can learn from looking at the people side of incidents and the kinds of questions we should be asking. Things like, who goes on call? Is it junior people or senior people? Is it always that one kind of superhero engineer who knows how everything works and somehow manages to be everywhere at all times? How often are people on call? When that 3 a.m. alert came through, was Alex, the SRE, already exhausted from doing a 10-hour day at work? Were they exhausted because they'd already been up till 2 a.m. responding to another alert? How familiar are they with the system they're supporting? Is it an application they helped to build? If not, how good was the handover when it went live? How are we training and supporting our engineers for being on call? How good is the documentation? How good are the dashboards? Are they dealing with incidents by themselves, or is there support available at 3 a.m? Who do they escalate to, and when and why? Who's in the incident channel? How many separate incident channels are there? Is this incident part of a wider pattern? So Nora Jones talked about one company she was at where she spotted a pattern of incidents, a spike that happened every quarter. And when she investigated, it emerged that it was actually caused by the company's policies around rewards, bonuses, and promotions. So engineers had individual quarterly targets to meet, what Nora Jones called promotion packets, that they had to meet by the end of the quarter to get bonuses and to be considered for promotion. And what was happening was, as the end of the quarter approached, engineers were rushing to finish these promotion packets and were merging code that wasn't really ready. And that then caused a spike in incidents. That just blew me away, that it's actually possible to make a direct link between incidents and production and the company's kind of incentivization scheme. I just think that's amazing. So as Dr. Cook said, there is wisdom in incidents. Okay, let's move on to look at some best practices for running successful postmortems in no particular order of importance. Ask someone not involved in the incident itself, an independent third party, to facilitate the discussion. This is really important. You need someone who can take a step back and ask seemingly naive questions to tease out the really good information that those who are closer to what happened sometimes just don't see. It's that thing of expert knowledge, and you don't know what you know. Having someone who objective, who can bring a fresh perspective, not just to the incident itself, but also to the underlying system and processes, without any of that kind of that's just how things work around here bias, is essential. You want your independent third-party facilitator to concentrate on doing just that, facilitating. And it's extremely hard to really listen to a conversation and pay attention to what people are saying and sometimes what they're not saying, and frame the right next question to ask if you're also trying to take notes. So find someone else who can do that and act as scribe for the discussion. Try not to leave too long a gap between the incident itself and when you hold the post-mortem. So appoint your facilitator, give them a few days to schedule a meeting, to do some preparatory work, assemble the timeline, maybe talk to some of those involved. But if you leave it too long, people will start to mentally move on and will start to forget the detail of what happened. So I've been in far too many post-mortem discussions where many of those attending seem to think that the whole point of the meeting is to come up with a list of follow-up actions to be taken. Sometimes people even come along to a post-mortem thinking that they already know exactly what happened and why, and that they know exactly what needs to be done to fix the issue. And it's usually the immediate issue. This is what Dr. Richard Cook calls microfracture repair. So try to avoid this. Only come up with actions if it actually makes sense to do so. You know, there's no requirement or rule written down somewhere that says that after every post-mortem, some part of the system in question needs to be fixed. The value is in the conversation, the learning, and the understanding of the system that comes from that conversation. Focus on the learning. It's recommended that you separate the discussion and the action brainstorming parts into separate meetings and allow a bit of soak time to happen between the two so that people have time to really digest and take on board the learning from the discussion rather than jumping straight to action stations. It might also be that you want different people in those different meetings. For example, you might want to bring in some subject matter experts when it comes to discussing any changes that need to be made. Any work and actions that do come out of postmortems need to be added to teams' normal backlogs of work, not recorded on a wiki page or a Word document somewhere, and not added to a special and separate JIRA project. It needs to be in with the team's normal work so it's visible to them and so it can be prioritised alongside everything else they have to do. Otherwise, it just won't get done. When you hold your post-mortem meeting, it should be open to anyone who's interested and wants to attend. That, of course, means you need to publish the details of when and where post-mortems are happening, along with some information about what the incident was. Don't be defensive. Embrace the ideals of being open and honest, and look to find the value and the lessons in your incident and how you responded to it. And be in no doubt, if people are choosing to come along to your post-mortems, that's a good thing. Take that as a sign that you're doing them well, that people are interested and that they're learning things. When you're done with the meeting, write up the discussion and the findings and publish the write-up for anyone to read. Being open and honest extends beyond the discussion itself, and another team might learn something from your experience. They should be in a central location, not in individual team spaces. And ideally, they should be searchable so that everyone knows where to go to find good write-ups and can search for ones that are relevant to their current problem or investigation. It's all about turning team learning into organisational learning. John Allspaw actually says that how often your post-mortem write-ups are read by others is a measure of how good a company's incident analysis process is, and is actually a metric that you should track at an organisational level. Do them for near misses as well as full-blown incidents. There's still loads you can learn, and you might prevent the same situation occurring and becoming a full outage in the future. It can be a fuzzy line sometimes between an almost incident and what we decide is the real thing. And those near misses are excellent opportunities for learning. Get creative with the questions you ask. Don't just go through the motions of what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we do better next time. Really try to understand how the decisions were made, what information those decisions were based on, who was making the decisions. You take a step back, look at the wider system, look for patterns. And finally, don't forget to retro your post-mortem process from time to time. Take the time to reflect, evaluate, and look for ways to improve. So to summarise, post-mortems are about improving our understanding of our systems, both technical and social. Focus on learning, not actions. Assume good intent and always stay curious. And that's it. Thank you for listening. Sorry, I kind of have to get a cat in here. That's kind of the rules with me. This is the Cheshire Cat to go along with Alice from my more Curiouser and Curiouser slide.